What's going on YouTube? It's Lynn Matheson here. Welcome back to the Canadian Real Estate channel. If you're not already subscribed, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more amazing real estate investing content here in Canada, local to you. So make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Today we are joined by Ryan from Carson Law, and we are actually going to be getting a lawyer's take on vendor take-back mortgages.
When the market kind of last had a plateau or a dip or a cooling, with the NRST coming into play, we saw this in 2018. We saw the same scenario. Unfortunately, you had people, buy at the height of the market, but now they're trying to sell in the cooled market. And so, there was this 6 to 12 month period of time where lawyers were kind of dealing with these problems where people were like, oh, I can't afford this. I can't do this deal. And so one way, if you act for the seller, or if the seller has equity to spare, this might be a good investment opportunity for them to do VTB financing.
So I'm really excited about this topic because I think this is going to be a hot button topic and an opportunity for both sellers and buyers in Canada in the coming weeks, months, maybe even years. We'll see how things shake out. So welcome to the channel, Ryan, and always appreciate having you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me again. And it's always great to be able to give some information and content to your subscribers and followers. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, let's just start with, what is a VTB mortgage? What does that actually mean? And then let's break it down from the seller and the buyer side, from your perspective and your take, just so that we can actually kind of talk through the potential options or how it can maybe better serve both a seller and a buyer as a creative opportunity here to close out a deal.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk with what is it? It would be considered private financing because, as the name suggests, it's a vendor take-back mortgage, meaning if you and I were buying a property, so I'm buying from you, you're the seller. You, Rebecca, would give me back a loan on the closing, which would be secured and registered to the property you're selling as a loan to me, as a mortgage. So that's why it gets the name vendor take-back financing or vendor take-back mortgage. So that's what it is. And so, I mean, the best way to maybe illustrate a potential scenario where it could be of use is actually a real life example that we're dealing with right now with a client. So our client is selling the property, and he sold just before all the interest rates started to hop. So I guess you could say he sold at the peak of the market. And the buyer has indicated through their firm, their lawyers, that there's a bit of financing issues here because he's now trying to sell because he hadn't sold yet, and now he's selling in a bit of maybe a plateaued or depressed market a bit, and obviously interest rates have gone up twice or whatever it is since the deal closed, right? So long story short, the buyer of my client's property has some financing concerns. And so at the end of the day, a possible solution to this, and the amount that's kind of been thrown around, is $200,000. So it's a almost $2 million property. And the concept and the idea is, well, why don't you just lower the price for me from 2 million to 1.8, right? Because then I'm not going to sell my place for let's say he was going to sell it at 1.7, but now he can only sell it at 1.5. right?
Right.
So the whole concept and idea is, each side takes a bit of a hit and everybody can still close because they can qualify for, applicable financing and so forth, right? But the strategy on our end is, okay, no, what we'll do is it's a firm deal. You're locked in at 2 million. And what we will do is my client has the equity coming out of the sale proceeds to provide you the loan back, give you this vendor take back mortgage. It'll be at terms, it'll be an interest only loan. So on 200,000, my guy will probably charge somewhere between 8 and 15% interest rate, which is a pretty good return on your investment. Let's say he charges 10 for an easy number. And let's say the mortgage term was for a year. So he knows he's going to make 20,000 on this passive investment for the course of the year. Which is not too bad, considering he's literally doing nothing and he's just going to get a 10% return, right? Plus the vendor take back mortgage is going to be secured against the property in which he just sold or is selling. So what that means in layperson terms is, if there's a default by the buyer on the terms of paying this vendor take back mortgage, you can send out a notice of default. If it's not remedied, then you can do a notice of sale, which gives you the option to take the property by power of sale under the Mortgages Act. So at the end of the day, hopefully that brief example, has given a bit of an illustration of, okay, what is a VTB? Mm-hmm. This is just one example where it could be somewhat applicable and somewhat maybe successful in solving a problem, right? Which is, there's this financing qualification issue now for the buyer.
Right.
Is this the first example that it might solve? And in solving it, creates a practical and quick solution for the deal to close. And it actually gives the seller a bit of an extra sort of ultimate return on their sale here, right? Because they're going to have this extra interest, because when the deal is fully paid out, in a year's time, when they refinance the property or get another private loan or whatever the case may be, you're going to get that full 200 back plus your costs. So really, as a VTB lender, you should never be, the terms are typical that you'd never be out of cost. You wouldn't be paying for lawyer fees; those would all come out of the deal, and so forth. So at the end of the day, you're kind of cost neutral. You make your interest only investment, and you should be, all things going normally, receiving your principal funds back at the term of the loan. And then if anything went badly, a default, non-payment, what have you, I mean, especially in this scenario, because it was just your home, like, the home. And so if it's, a piece of crap, or if it's actually a pretty good home. And so in which case, unless they significantly damage the property, which I'm not really sure why anybody would do that if they just bought it, that you've got a pretty good piece of security to try to reacquire your capital investment in this deal, right, through ultimate power of sale of the property, right? And so that's one way in which I think VTBs will certainly, at least for a temporary period of time here, because we saw this in 2018 as well, when the market kind of last had a plateau or a dip or a cooling, with the NRST coming into play. We saw this in 2018. We saw the same scenario. Unfortunately, you had people, buy at the height of the market, but now they're trying to sell in the cooled market. And so, there was this 6 to 12 month period of time where lawyers were kind of dealing with these problems where people were like, well, I can't afford this. I can't do this deal. And so one way, if you act for the seller, or if the seller has equity to spare, this might be a good investment opportunity for them to do VTB financing.
Right. I actually really like that point there too. It's a property that you're super familiar with. Now, your example, you actually gave an example of a second position mortgage that the kind of seller is going to be in for that property. We can also be in first position as the seller as well. So if you have a ton of equity, maybe you're a real estate investor that's owned a property for a really long time, and now you're kind of in a position where you want to sell it. You can get the purchase price that's agreed to, but also get the interest on that as well if you're holding that first position mortgage. So certainly if there's a lot of value to be added to the property, or like maybe the house, the property's in disrepair, or maybe it's an opportunity where you know, that seller has just had it in the family for a long time, or, you know, in terms of that property, they just own it outright and don't need the money right away, then I think that's a great opportunity for a seller to actually, well, make more on the actual sale at the end of the day, because they get the interest payments, as well as set somebody else up for success in the property. And if it's a hard property to finance, then it's a benefit to both the seller and to the buyer in those scenarios, because like you said, you get the property back if there's any sort of default. It's a property that you know, and typically that new buyer coming in is going to want to add value. So they're looking to actually fix the problems in the property and add value to that. So it's a really interesting way where you can invest really in something that you already know and continue to get returns from it. So it's almost like a swap. If you're a landlord that's owned property for a really long time, instead of taking tenant payments, you can now just take interest payments from the exact same property, and then you don't have any of the same tenant problems anymore. And you're making the capital off the property still. So I think there's a lot of really, between the buyer and the seller, potential for a symbiotic relationship there, where you can figure out what the needs are of each party and really come to price and terms that make sense. And really the cool thing about it is that the interest payments are you can choose what you want. So if maybe your bank qualification, you're having to qualify way high at the bank, or interest rates continue to go up, then you can just set your own interest with the seller and kind of decide what makes sense for you. Or you could even get that in the short term while you're doing the renovations with the seller, and they get to make a larger percentage of interest, and then you refinance traditionally. There's so many ways that you can actually set this up, but I think the key thing that you mentioned there is that they need to have the equity in the property or the room to actually hold the financing.
Yeah, exactly right. Like, I mean, without the equity and the actual availability of the necessary capital by the seller, then, well, it's just, there's no option, right? But I mean, to build on what you said, I mean, this could, I know out there's probably an investor or even several that do a lot of deals with VTBs, right? Especially people that, you know, are acquiring properties, you know, from potential developers, like landowners, developers, estates. Like an estate sale acquisition is a great possible opportunity, because not all the time, but a lot of time, if somebody's died, well, property's probably going to have very low security against it, or none whatsoever. So, you know, it's obviously going to have equity available. So it's just a question of whether or not the representatives of the estate want to get into, you know, doing that kind of thing. They might feel that, no, I've got to just process this as quickly as possible for the beneficiaries to have, or they might say, oh geez, this is a great opportunity to make an extra whatever points for the estate, right? Whether it's 10, 15 or 20 or who knows what, right?
Absolutely.
But I know that a lot of investors have specifically created a strategy of kind of targeting like estates, and not targeting in a bad way, but just they're focused on the opportunity of a VTB finance just from an estate sale is just likely higher. So I know that they particularly focus on estate sales because they want to utilize a VTB. Because lots of times, sometimes people use the VTB as the balance due on closing, in the sense that they have financing from a private or a bank, and the VTBs disclosed to the lender, which is important. Like you need to make sure if you have other financing that they're aware of the VTB, because you don't want to get to the end and then find that the VTB scuttles the financing, if it's not like a first mortgage, as you alluded to, right? But the bottom line is that the VTB financing could make it so that as a real estate investor, instead of going out and find money partners on JV agreements, well, now you just close on a deal with a lender that will accept VTB financing and a seller who gave you the financing, right?
Absolutely.
Like to close your BDOC or your balance due on closing, right? So that's another scenario where, again, if the equity is available and the parties are all willing and it's not going to scuttle any other financing you've arranged, you can creatively have the real estate investment go through with very low cash outlay by you, right? Because it's all getting financed by the seller, as well as your whatever your lender is, right? If there is one, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, if you guys are listening to this video and you're a seller or you're a buyer, that this sounds pretty interesting and you want to learn a little bit more about it, make sure that you tune in for part 2 of this VTB series here with Ryan from Carson Law. We are going to break it down even further for you guys so that you guys can understand exactly what that looks like and really hear from a lawyer's take how to actually process that vendor take back and the nitty-gritty details of how that all works. So Ryan, thank you so much for sharing exactly your take on vendor take back mortgages. You guys heard it here first. I'm sure that you've seen all of the videos that we've pumped out about vendor take back mortgages in the past, but this is definitely an important perspective and take on this actual mortgage is the lawyer's take on the vendor take back mortgage. I think it's really important that you have all of your power team involved and understand the pros and cons of doing things like this that are a little bit more creative, a little bit less mainstream in the way that you structure the deal. And tune in for the next video, guys. Make sure that you like and subscribe down below if you haven't already here on the Canadian Real Estate channel. And Ryan, thanks again for tuning in. Where's the best place for people to find you?
CarsonLaw.ca.
CarsonLaw.ca. Awesome, guys. Well, hop over to CarsonLaw.ca. Maybe if you want some help structuring a vendor take-back mortgage, Ryan's your guy. And again, thanks for tuning in on today's video. We'll see you guys on the next one for part 2. We'll see you there. Peace.